Rain pelts the cracked asphalt of Pete's auto shop as Elena Martinez wipes grease from her hands, studying the engine before her with practiced eyes. At 35, she's learned to fix everything but her own life, juggling 2 jobs, mounting, bills, and a daughter's dreams that seem just out of reach. The Mercedes shouldn't even be here. Pete's shop handles rusted pickups and tired sedans, not luxury cars. But when she saw it broken down on Main Street, something made her stop. Maybe it was the rain, or maybe it was the memory of all those times no one stopped for her. Now, hearing footsteps approach behind her, Elena doesn't yet know that this simple act of kindness is about to change everything. Who is this mysterious stranger, and why will his secret transform both their lives forever? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 6 hours earlier, Elena's alarm chirped at 4:30 a.m., a sound she'd learned to silence before it could wake Sophia. Their small apartment above Rosie's diner held the familiar morning sounds, the gentle hum of the aging refrigerator, the distant rumble of early delivery trucks, and the soft breathing of her 12-year-old daughter in the next room. Elena's worn toolbox sat by the door where she'd left it last night, its red paint chipped and faded, revealing the silver metal. Beneath, her father's name, Miguel, was still visible on the handle, etched there 20 years ago. She ran her fingers over the letters as she did every morning, a ritual that felt like both a prayer and a promise. "Mummy?" Sophia's voice drifted from her bedroom, still heavy with sleep. "Is it morning already?" "Go back to sleep, Mija," Elena whispered, crossing to her daughter's room. Sophia lay curled under her favorite blanket, dark hair spilling across. The pillow, next to her bed, a science fair trophy, caught the dim light, first place in engineering, just like her grandfather. "But I wanted to help with breakfast," Sophia protested, already drifting back to sleep. Elena smiled, tucking the blanket more securely around her daughter's shoulders. "Not today. Mrs. Rodriguez is opening the diner. I'm heading to Pete's early. There's a transmission waiting for me." By 5:15, Elena was navigating the quiet streets, her father's toolbox secure in the passenger seat. The radio hummed softly, some love song about second chances that made her think of Miguel, of Sunday afternoons spent learning the secrets hidden in engines, while her mother shook her head, saying girls should focus on other things. But Papi knew better, didn't? Elena murmured to the toolbox as she pulled into Pete's auto shop. The familiar smell of oil and metal greeted her as she unlocked the front door, flipping on lights that buzzed to life reluctantly. Pete himself wouldn't be in until 8. Arthritis making early mornings harder these days, but he trusted Elena with the shop, had trusted her ever since that day 5 years ago when she'd walked in, newly widowed, with a 7-year-old daughter and a resume that listed waitress and self-taught mechanic. She'd expected rejection. Instead, Pete had handed her a wrench and pointed to a stubborn Chevy engine. "Show me what Miguel taught you," he'd said. And Elena realized he'd known her father, back when Miguel was the best mechanic in 3 counties. Now, as she organized her tools for the day ahead, Elena thought about the bills waiting at home. Sophia's school was suggesting advanced science classes, extra fees they couldn't afford. The diner's morning shifts barely covered groceries, and even with Pete's generosity, there never seemed to be quite enough. But Sophia had her father's smile and her grandfather's gift for understanding how things worked. Elena would find a way, just like she always did. She'd learned that from Miguel, too. There was always a solution if you were willing to look hard enough, to get your hands dirty, to keep trying when others might give up. The first rays of dawn were just breaking through the shop's dusty windows when Elena heard the distinctive sound of an expensive car engine struggling. She looked up from her work, wiping her hands on a rag as she moved to the front of the shop. Through the glass, she could see a sleek black Mercedes pulled to the side of the road, hazard lights blinking accusingly in the early morning light. Something about the scene made her pause. Pete's didn't handle luxury cars. They were strictly American muscle and working-class wheels. But there was something in the way the engine sounded, a familiar note of distress that called to the part of her that could never resist a mechanical challenge. "What would you do, puppy?" she asked the toolbox. The answer came in her father's voice, as clear as if he were standing beside her. "Every engine tells a story, Elena. Sometimes you just have to be willing to listen." With a small smile, Elena picked up her father's toolbox and stepped out into the rain. The Mercedes engine ticked as it cooled, raindrops sliding down its pristine black paint. Elena approached cautiously, her toolbox heavy in her hand. Up close, the car was even more impressive, a new S-Class, probably worth more than she'd make in 3 years. A man in an expensive suit stood beside it, phone pressed to his ear. "No, cancel the morning meetings," he was saying, frustration evident in his clipped tone. "The car's dead, and I'm stuck in—" He glanced around as if just realizing where he was. "Some neighborhood." Elena cleared her throat. "Sounds like your timing chain." He turned, surprised, taking in her work clothes and the toolbox. For a moment, she saw what he must see. A woman in oil-stained coveralls, clearly not the type who usually handled vehicles like his. But Elena had spent too many years proving herself to care about first impressions. "You're a mechanic." His tone was curious rather than dismissive, which was something. "At Pete's." She gestured to the shop behind them. "I heard your engine. Mind if I take a look?" He hesitated, then nodded, ending his call. "James Bradford," he said, extending his hand, "and I'd appreciate any help. I have a meeting I can't miss." Elena set her toolbox down, popping the hood with practiced ease. The engine was a masterpiece of German engineering, but the problem was immediately apparent to her trained eye. "Definitely the timing chain," she confirmed. "But there's something else." She leaned in closer, ignoring the rain that had begun to soak through her coveralls. There was a subtle irregularity in the way the engine sat, a slight misalignment that shouldn't exist in a car this expensive. "How long have you had this car?" she asked, straightening up. "About 6 months. Why?" "Because someone's been doing amateur work on this engine. See these marks?" She pointed to barely visible scratches on the cylinder head. "They've been trying to hide a manufacturing defect." James moved closer, his expensive suit getting damp as he peered where she pointed. The scent of his cologne mingled with the smell of rain and engine oil. "How can you tell?" "My father taught me to read engines like stories. Every scratch, every wear pattern, they all tell you something." Elena reached for her toolbox. "I can fix it, but it'll take a few hours. And you should probably talk to your dealer about that defect." A strange expression crossed James's face, something between amusement and intrigue. "You seem to know a lot about high-end engines for—" He trailed off, apparently thinking better of whatever he'd been about to say. "For someone working at Pete's?" Elena finished for him, a familiar defensiveness creeping into her voice. "I know engines, Mr. Bradford, all kinds, and right now yours needs help." To her surprise, he laughed. "Please call me James, and I apologize. I didn't mean to offend. It's just surprising to find this level of expertise in an independent shop." Elena softened slightly. At least he was honest about his assumptions. "You'd be surprised what you can find in unexpected places." She pulled out her father's favorite wrench, the one he'd always said was lucky. "Now, do you want me to fix your car, or would you prefer to wait for the dealer?" James checked his watch, then looked at the rain-slicked street and the growing morning traffic. "I trust you," he said finally. "Do what you need to do." As Elena began work on the engine, she was aware of James watching her with increasing interest. He didn't hover anxiously like some customers, or try to tell her how to do her job. Instead, he asked intelligent questions about what she was doing, genuinely seeming to want to understand. "You know," he said after a while, "most people wouldn't have noticed that manufacturing defect. Elena tightened a bolt with precision. Most people don't look closely enough. They see what they expect to see. And what do you see? There was something in his voice that made her look up. He was studying her with an intensity that had nothing to do with the car. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed. A text from Sophia. "Good morning, Mummy. Don't forget I have science club after school. Love you." The message brought Elena back to reality. This wasn't a moment from a romance novel. This was work, and she had responsibilities. "I see a timing chain that needs fixing," she said firmly, turning back to the engine. "And if you want to make your meeting, we should focus on that." But as she worked, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was happening. Something that went beyond a simple car repair on a rainy morning. The old auto repair manual sat open on Elena's workbench, its pages worn and annotated in her father's precise handwriting. She didn't need it for this repair. She knew Mercedes' engines inside and out, but having it nearby felt right. Miguel's notes filled the margins. "Always check the secondary systems and listen to what the engine tells you." James had stepped away to make more calls, his voice a distant murmur beneath the steady drum of rain on the shop's roof. Elena took advantage of the solitude to fully assess the engine. Beyond the timing chain issue, she'd discovered evidence of systemic problems that shouldn't exist in a car this new. "What are you trying to tell me?" she whispered to the engine, running her fingers along the cylinder head. There, another subtle mark that matched the pattern she'd noticed earlier. "Talking to engines now." James's voice startled her. He'd returned quietly, his suit jacket discarded, sleeve rolled up despite the expensive fabric. Eleanor didn't look up. "My father always said engines speak to those who know how to listen." Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she worked. "And yours is telling quite a story." "Oh?" James moved closer, and Eleanor caught that hint of expensive cologne again. "What's it saying?" "That someone's been covering up systematic flaws in the engine design." She straightened, meeting his eyes. "These marks, they're consistent with a manufacturing defect that someone's trying to hide. And based on the pattern, it's not just your car." Something shifted in James's expression. Surprise, followed by what looked like respect. "You got all that from these small marks?" Eleanor reached for her father's manual, flipping to a page dense with his handwritten observations. "See this? My father documented similar issues in luxury cars 20 years ago. Different brands, same problem. Companies choosing to hide defects rather than fix them." James studied the manual with unexpected intensity. "Your father was Miguel Martinez, wasn't he?" Elena's hand stilled on the engine. "You knew him?" "I knew of him. His research on engine design flaws was influential in certain circles." James's tone was careful, measured. He submitted several papers to automotive engineering journals in the 90s. "Before he had to quit to support the family," Elena added, a familiar mix of pride and regret coloring her voice. "He always said education could wait, but feeding his family couldn't." The sound of a car pulling up outside interrupted them. Through the rain-streaked windows, Elena saw Sophia climbing out of Mrs. Rodriguez's minivan. Bright yellow raincoat, a splash of color against the gray day. "Mommy!" Sophia burst into the shop, then stopped short at the sight of the Mercedes. "Whoa!" "Sophia, what are you doing here?" Elena wiped her hands on a rag. "I thought you had science club." "Cancelled. Mr. Parker is sick." Sophia approached the car with undisguised curiosity. "This is amazing. Is that the new S-Class engine? We just studied hybrid drive systems in Tech Club." James looked at Sophia with surprise. "You know about hybrid?" "Oh, drive systems? She knows about everything mechanical," Elena said proudly, just like her grandfather. Sophia was already peering into the engine compartment. "Mummy, look at this wear pattern on the timing chain housing. It's just like in Abuelo's manual, where he wrote about the 95 models." James watched this exchange with growing interest. "You've read your grandfather's research?" "She's read everything she can get her hands on," Elena answered, sharing a knowing look with her daughter. Engineering books, technical manuals, automotive journals, the ones I can access online anyway, Sophia added. A lot of the good stuff is behind paywalls. Something unreadable flickered across James's face. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then seemed to think better of it. Instead, he checked his watch. How much longer on the repairs? Give me another hour, Elena said, turning back to the engine. I want to document these defects properly. Someone should know about this. Someone already does, James murmured. So quietly, Elena wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. Sophia settled into her usual corner with her homework, occasionally glancing up to watch her mother work. The familiar sounds of the shop, tools against metal, the quiet hum of the overhead fans, the distant traffic, created a comfortable backdrop to their work. But as Elena's hands moved through the familiar rhythms of repair, her mind kept returning to James's words about her father's research and the way he'd looked at those defect patterns. There was something he wasn't saying, some piece of the puzzle she couldn't quite grasp. What she couldn't know yet, was that this rainy morning was about to open doors she'd thought were forever closed, leading her back to the dreams she'd set aside long ago. The magazine was buried under a stack of invoices on Pete's desk, last month's issue of Automotive Excellence. Eleanor might never have noticed it if Sophia hadn't knocked over the pile while reaching for her backpack. As papers scattered across the floor, the glossy cover caught her eye. Bradford Automotive's revolutionary new engine design, and there, smiling confidently from the page, was James. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she picked up the magazine. The headline under his photo read, CEO James Bradford leads industry innovation. The reality of who had been standing in her shop all morning hit her like a physical force. "Mummy!" Sophia had noticed her mother's strange expression. "What's wrong?" Before Elena could answer, James returned from his latest phone call. He stopped short at the sight of the magazine in her hands, and for a moment, the only sound was the steady drum of rain on the roof. "You're James Bradford," Eleanor said flatly, "CEO of Bradford Automotive." He nodded slowly. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out. Why didn't you tell me?" The question came out sharper than she'd intended, colored by years of dealing with people who underestimated her, because for the first time in years, someone was treating me like a person with a broken car, not a CEO. He moved closer, glancing at the magazine. "And because I wanted to see what you'd do with that engine." Sophia, who had been following the exchange with wide eyes, suddenly gasped. "Bradford Automotive. They're the ones developing the new hybrid system everyone's talking about." She looked at James with newfound awe. "Is it true you're revolutionizing fuel injection?" Despite her irritation, Elena couldn't help but smile at her daughter's enthusiasm. James seemed equally charmed. "It's true," he said, turning to Sophia. "Though from what I've seen today, you and your mother could probably teach us a few things about engine design." "Is that what this was?" Elena asked. "Some kind of test?" James's expression grew serious. "Not initially. The breakdown was real. Though I admit I've been fascinated by your expertise." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "Do you know why your father's research was so influential?" Eleanor shook her head. Miguel had never talked much about his papers after he'd left engineering, because he predicted exactly the kind of defects you found today. Defects that are currently plaguing every major manufacturer, including mine. James picked up Miguel's manual from the workbench, handling it with unexpected reverence. This is automotive history, and you've inherited not just his knowledge, but his intuition." "What are you saying?" Elena asked, though something in her heart was already racing ahead, sensing the possibility hanging in the air. "I'm saying that Bradford Automotive needs someone like you. Someone who can spot problems others miss, who understands engines at a fundamental level." He smiled slightly. "The fact that you're Miguel Martinez's daughter feels like fate." Sophia bounced excitedly. "Mommy, this is just like in those movies where..." "Sophia," Elena cut her off gently, though her own thoughts were whirling. To James, she said, "I never finished my engineering degree, but you have something better. 20 years of hands-on experience, a natural talent." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. Unlike the usual glossy corporate cards, this one was simple, elegant, with just his name and direct number. "I'd like you to come work for me, help us build better engines the way your father wanted to." The offer hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Through the shop window, Elena could see the rain had finally stopped, sunlight breaking through the clouds. It felt symbolic, though she tried to push away such fanciful thoughts. "I have responsibilities here," she said, thinking of Pete, of the regular customers who depended on her. "And Sophia." "Mommy," Sophia interrupted, her voice uncharacteristically serious. "Remember what Abuelo always said? Sometimes the best opportunities come disguised as broken engines." James laughed, a warm sound that seemed to fill the shop. "Your daughter is very wise." Elena looked down at the business card in her hand, then at her father's manual, and finally at Sophia's hopeful face. The dreams she'd packed away so carefully all those years ago were suddenly stirring, demanding to be acknowledged. "I'll think about it," she said finally, but as she met James's eyes, they both knew she'd already made her decision. The acceptance letter was still in her bedside drawer, yellowed with age but carefully preserved. After Sophia went to bed that night, Elena sat cross-legged on her bed and read it again. "We are pleased to offer you admission to our engineering program." The full scholarship she'd had to turn down when her father got sick, when family had to come before dreams. From the living room, she could hear Sophia talking excitedly on the phone to her best friend. And Mom totally diagnosed the problem just by listening to the engine. "You should have seen Mr. Bradford's face." Elena smiled despite her churning thoughts. The day felt surreal, like one of those dreams where everything you've ever wanted is suddenly within reach, but you can't quite trust it's real. Pete had been surprisingly supportive when she'd told him about the offer. Miguel always said, "You were meant for bigger things," he'd said, his weathered face gentle. "This shop was just a stepping stone, Elena. We both knew that. But was it really that simple?" She unfolded James's business card, studying the embossed letters. The salary he'd mentioned was more than she'd ever dreamed of making. Enough to move to a better neighborhood, to give Sophia all the advanced classes and engineering camps she deserved. And yet, her phone buzzed with a text from James. "No pressure, but I'd like you to tour our R&D facility tomorrow. Bring Sophia. Our engineering team would love to meet her." Elena's heart jumped at the casual mention of Sophia. Most executives wouldn't think to include a 12-year-old in professional discussions, but James had seen what Elena saw. A young girl with her grandfather's gift, hungry for knowledge and opportunity. She walked to Sophia's room, pausing in the doorway. Her daughter was finally asleep, her desk cluttered with the day's homework and sketches of engine designs. Next to her pillow lay the magazine with James's photo, dog-eared to the article about Bradford Automotive's innovations. "What would you think, puppy?" she whispered to the quiet room. "Is this the chance you always wanted for me?" As if in answer, a car passed outside, its engine making that distinctive purr that Miguel had taught her to recognize. Perfect timing, perfect balance. The sound that had always meant home and possibility and dreams just out of reach. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Sarah from the diner. "Hey, Elena, can you cover my morning shift tomorrow? Emergency dentist appointment." Reality crashed. Back in, she had responsibilities, people who counted on her. The diner's owner had been flexible with her schedule for years, letting her work around Sophia's school hours. Pete had given her a chance when no one else would. Could she really walk away from all that? But then she thought of James's words, about her father's research, about the way he'd looked at her when she'd diagnosed those engine defects. For the first time in years, someone had seen her not as a single mom struggling to get by, but as an engineer, a problem solver, someone with valuable expertise. Elena pulled out her father's old manual, flipping through the familiar pages until she found what she was looking for. His last entry, written just before he got sick. Remember me, Hija. Every engine can be fixed, every problem solved. The only limit is the courage to try. She traced his handwriting with her finger, feeling the slight indentations in the paper. Miguel had given up his own dreams to take care of his family. But maybe, just maybe, this was his dream coming full circle through her. With sudden determination, Elena picked up her phone and typed a reply to James. What time tomorrow? Sophia and I will be there. She hesitated only a moment before hitting send. Sometimes she realized the bravest thing you can do is allow yourself to hope again. The contract papers sat unopened on the polished conference table while Elena and Sophia stared through floor-to-ceiling windows at Bradford Automotive's R&D facility. Below them, teams of engineers moved between testing bays where prototype engines gleamed under bright lights. The entire floor hummed with the kind of energy Elena remembered from her father's stories about engineering labs. "Is this real?" Sophia whispered, pressing her hands against the glass. "Mummy, look at those diagnostic computers." James stood slightly apart, watching their reactions with poorly concealed pleasure. "Would you like to see them up close?" Sophia's eyes lit up, but she looked to her mother first. Elena nodded, touched by her daughter's instinctive deference. "Go ahead, Mija, but don't touch anything without permission." They followed James down to the main floor, where the smell of metal and oil reminded Elena of Pete's shop. Though here it mixed with the scent of new electronics and fresh coffee. Engineers looked up curiously as they passed, some nodding in recognition at James. "Everyone," James called out, his voice carrying easily across the space. "I'd like you to meet Elena Martinez and her daughter Sophia. Elena will be joining our quality control team, bringing some much-needed real-world expertise to our theoretical models." Elena felt her cheeks warm at the introduction. "I haven't actually accepted yet," she murmured. James smiled. "You will." It wasn't arrogance in his voice, but certainty, as if he recognized something in her that she was just beginning to see in herself. A young engineer approached, tablet in hand. "Ms. Martinez, I'm Dr. Sarah Chen. I've been studying your father's papers on predictive failure analysis. His work was years ahead of its time." Elena blinked in surprise. "You know my father's research? Everyone in automotive engineering knows. Miguel Martinez's work," another engineer chimed in. "His theories about systematic defect patterns are the foundation of modern quality control." Sophia beamed with pride, while Elena struggled to reconcile this image of her father's legacy with her memories of him working late at Pete's shop, too tired to even talk about engineering anymore. James guided them through the facility, introducing key team members and explaining ongoing projects. Elena found herself automatically analyzing the engines they passed, spotting potential issues and improvements. Each time she spoke up, the engineers listened with genuine interest, several taking notes. "This is where you'd be working," James said finally, stopping at a state-of-the-art testing bay. "Your experience with real-world engine failures would help us catch problems before they reach production." Eleanor ran her hand along a prototype engine block, feeling the precise machining under her fingers. "It's beautiful," she admitted. "More importantly, it's practical," James added. "We need someone who understands both the theory and the reality of how engines perform under actual conditions." Sophia, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. "Would I be allowed to visit sometimes?" James's expression softened. "We have an extensive internship program for high school students. In a few years, you could do more than just visit." Elena's heart tightened at the thought of Sophia's future. All the doors this opportunity could open for her daughter. But still, she hesitated. "The salary we discussed," she began carefully, "it's very generous, but moving to this area is expensive." James finished, which is why the contract includes a housing allowance and relocation costs. He gestured to the untouched papers on the conference room table. Everything you need to make this transition is there, Elena, including a scholarship fund for Sophia's education. Elena's breath caught. That's too much. It's an investment, James corrected, in both of you. They returned to the conference room, where Elena finally opened the contract. The terms were even better than James had indicated, including flexibility for Sophia's school schedule and time to complete her own engineering degree if she chose. "Why me?" she asked suddenly, looking up at James. "There must be hundreds of qualified engineers who'd want this position. Because you have something they don't, the ability to see what others miss, just like your father." James paused, then added more softly, "And because sometimes the right person comes along at exactly the right moment." Eleanor looked at Sophia, who gave her an encouraging nod, then down at the contract again. With hands that trembled only slightly, she picked up the pen. Sometimes, she thought, signing her name, the biggest risks bring the greatest rewards. The prototype design glowed. On Elena's computer screen, its 3D rendering rotating slowly to show every angle. 2 weeks into her new job, and she was still adjusting to the transition from physical wrenches to digital diagnostics. But something about this engine design bothered her, the same instinct that had helped her spot countless problems at Pete's. "The simulation shows it's perfect," Dr. Chen said from the doorway, making Elena jump. "We've run it through every possible scenario." Elena zoomed in on the fuel injection system. "Simulations can't account for everything. Real-world conditions. A messiah. That's why we hired you," a new voice added. Thomas Wright, head of engineering, stepped into her office. His expression was hard to read. "Though some of us are still uncertain about bringing in someone with unconventional qualifications." Elena felt her shoulders tense. She'd heard the whispers, seen the sideways glances from some of the senior engineers. The former mechanic, who'd caught the CEO's attention, the high school dropout playing at being an engineer. "With all due respect, Mr. Wright," she said, keeping her voice steady, "I think I've found a potential issue with the prototype." Wright raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" Elena pulled up the simulation data. "The fuel injection timing is perfect under ideal conditions. But look what happens when you factor in temperature variations and fuel quality inconsistencies." Her fingers flew over the keyboard, adjusting parameters. "In the real world, engines don't operate in perfect conditions. They run hot, cold, with dirty fuel, with varying octane levels." The simulation flickered, then showed a clear performance degradation under the new parameters. Dr. Chen leaned forward, interested. "That's actually a significant problem, one that wouldn't show up in standard testing," Wright admitted grudgingly. "How did you spot it?" "I've seen similar issues in older models," Elena explained. "Different engines, same principle. When you've had to fix something enough times, you learn to spot the warning signs." Wright studied the simulation for a long moment. "Draw up a full report. I want detailed recommendations for modifications." He paused at the door. "And good work, Martinez." After he left, Dr. Chen grinned. "You just impressed the unimpressible Thomas Wright. Not bad for your second week." Elena smiled back, but her attention was already returning to the engine design. She'd learned early in life that respect had to be earned fresh each day, especially when you didn't fit people's expectations. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sophia. "First day of advanced science camp. They have a whole engine lab," followed by several excited emojis and a photo of Sophia grinning in safety goggles. The sight warmed Elena's heart. The camp had been beyond their means before, but now she thought of their new apartment, with its view of the city, and more importantly, its proximity to the best schools in the district. Sophia was thriving, surrounded by other kids who shared her passion for science and engineering. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. James stood there, casual in shirt sleeves despite his CEO status. "How's our newest engineer settling in?" "Still adjusting," Elena admitted. But I think I found something important in the new prototype." James moved to her desk, scanning the simulation data. "The fuel injection issue? Wright just told me. This could have caused significant problems down the line." He smiled. You're proving me right about bringing you on board. Some people still think it was favoritism," Elena said quietly. "Let them think what they want. Results speak louder than rumors." James leaned against her desk. "Though I have to admit, I had an ulterior motive in hiring you." Elena's heart skipped. "Oh? Your father's research, it wasn't just ahead of its time. It was revolutionary, but he never got to complete it." James pulled out a familiar leather-bound notebook, her father's manual. "I had our archivist digitize his notes. There are theories in here that could transform engine design, especially regarding predictive maintenance and failure prevention." Elena stared at the manual. "You want me to continue his work? I want you to finish what he started, with full funding and resources this time." James's eyes were intense. "What do you say?" Before Elena could respond, an alarm blared from her computer. The prototype simulation was flashing red, showing cascading failures under her modified parameters. "Hold that thought," she said, already typing. "We've got a bigger problem to solve first." James watched her work with an approving smile. "Like father, like daughter," he murmured, leaving her to it. Elena barely noticed him go, lost in the familiar rhythm of problem-solving. She might be using different tools now, but the fundamental challenge remained the same, finding what was broken and making it work better, just like her father had taught her. The family photo sat on Elena's new desk, slightly out of place among the technical manuals and engineering reports. It showed 3 generations of Martinez mechanics, her father Miguel in his shop apron, a younger Elena holding a wrench, and baby Sofia perched on Miguel's workbench, reaching for a spark plug. Elena found herself looking at it more often lately, especially on days like today. "Mom!" Sofia burst into her office, backpack still on. "Why didn't you answer your phone? I've been trying to reach you for hours." Elena glanced at her phone, buried under simulation printouts. 5 missed calls. "I'm sorry, Mija. We had a critical testing phase and you missed my presentation." Sofia cut in, her voice trembling slightly. "The one about Abuelo's engine design theories. Everyone's parents were there, but you..." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She'd written it in her calendar, had even planned to leave early. But then the prototype had shown unexpected issues, and Wright had needed immediate solutions, and somehow... "Sofia, I'm so sorry. I got caught up in work. You always do now." Sofia slumped into a chair. "You used to never miss anything." Before Elena could respond, James appeared in the doorway. "Elena, the board is waiting for your analysis of the..." He trailed off, reading the tension in the room. "Everything okay?" "Fine," Sofia said quickly, standing. "I should go anyway. Lots of homework." "Sofia, wait." But her daughter was already gone, leaving behind only the echo of hurried footsteps. James stepped into the office, closing the door. "Want to talk about it?" Elena gestured helplessly at her cluttered desk. "I'm drowning here. Every time I solve one problem, 3 more appear, and now I'm failing at the one job that matters most. Being a mother? Being present." Elena picked up the family photo. "My father worked hard, but he never missed a single school event. Not one. He said time was the most valuable thing you could give someone." James settled into the chair Sofia had vacated. "Tell me about him. The man, not the engineer." Elena traced her father's smile in the photo. "He could fix anything. Engines, appliances, broken hearts. Every Saturday, he'd teach me something new about cars. But really, he was teaching me about life." She smiled at the memory. "He always said, 'Elena, when something's broken, you have 2 choices. Give up or find a new way to make it work.'" Sounds like a wise man. He was. Elena set the photo down. "And now I'm letting down both him and Sofia." "Are you?" James leaned forward. From what I've seen, you're giving Sophia opportunities your father could only dream of. Sometimes that means making hard choices. But at what cost? Elena stood pacing. The other parents at her new school, they look at me differently, the single mum from the wrong side of town, trying to fit into their world. And now I'm proving them right by missing important moments. You're proving them wrong every day, James countered. You're showing Sophia that a woman can excel in a male-dominated field, that it's never too late to chase your dreams. He paused. Though, perhaps we need to revisit your work schedule. Elena stopped pacing. What do you mean? You're not just any engineer, Elena. You're a single mother with unique needs. We can adjust around that. He pulled out his phone, typing quickly. I'm having HR revise your contract to include flexible hours and remote work options when needed. You don't have to. I want to, James interrupted, because I need you focused on innovation, not worried about missing your daughter's presentations. His expression softened. Besides, I have a feeling Sophia's insights into her grandfather's work could be valuable to us all. Elena felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. James stood, straightening his jacket. The board still needs that analysis, but it can wait until tomorrow. Right now I think you have a daughter to talk to. After he left, Elena gathered her things quickly, but paused at the family photo one more time. Finding a new way to make it work, she murmured to her father's smiling face. I'm trying, Papi. I'm really trying. The drive home was quiet, giving Elena time to think. She'd been so focused on proving herself professionally that she'd forgotten her father's most important lesson. No engine was worth sacrificing the people you loved. Now she just had to figure out how to balance it all, and hope it wasn't. Too late to show Sophia that some things would never change, no matter what titles they added to their names. The failed project report lay open on Elena's desk, its bright red critical failure stamp seeming to pulse in the late afternoon light. 3 months of work, countless simulations, and endless refinements of her father's theories, all amounting to what Thomas Wright had called an unmitigated disaster in the morning's board meeting. The prototype engine failed catastrophically during stress testing, Elena explained to James, who stood by the window of her office. The modifications I suggested based on Dad's research, they made things worse, not better. Show me, James said quietly. Elena pulled up the test footage. On screen, the experimental engine ran smoothly for the first few minutes before something went terribly wrong. Metal shrieked against metal, and then... Stop! James said, wincing at the sound. How much did this cost us? $2 million in prototype development. Plus, Elena swallowed hard. We've lost our testing window. The production schedule for next year's models is now in jeopardy, James finished. The board is concerned. They're right to be. Elena stood, needing to move. I was so sure Dad's theories about dynamic load distribution would work. I must have missed something in his notes, some crucial detail. Or maybe, Wright's voice cut in from the doorway, we made a mistake thinking a mechanic could handle advanced engineering concepts. Elena felt the familiar surge of defensiveness, but before she could respond, her phone buzzed. A text from Sophia's school. Urgent. Please contact office regarding incident during lunch period. I have to go, Elena said, already gathering her things. Sophia, running away won't fix this, Martinez, Wright snapped. We need solutions, not excuses. My daughter needs me, Elena shot back. The engine can wait an hour. Can it? Wright gestured at the simulation still frozen on her screen. We've got suppliers waiting on specs, production deadlines approaching, and millions invested in your father's theoretical fantasies. Thomas, James warned, but Wright wasn't finished. Face it, Bradford, your pet project is a failure. Martinez here might be good with a wrench, but real engineering, that's clearly beyond her capabilities. Elena stopped at the door, her father's voice echoing in her memory. Never let them see you doubt yourself, Mika. You belong anywhere you're willing to work hard enough to stay. She turned back slowly. You're right about one thing, Mr. Wright. I'm not a traditional engineer. I learned about engines by fixing them, not just designing them. And right now, that's exactly what this project needs. She moved to her computer, fingers flying over the keyboard. Look at the failure point. It's not in the design, it's in how we're testing it. We're running it like a conventional engine, but Dad's design requires a completely different approach. The simulation reconstructed, showing new angles. There, see that heat distribution pattern? It's exactly like what I used to see in modified racing engines. We're not pushing it too hard. We're not pushing it hard enough. Wright leaned in despite himself, frowning at the data. That's actually a reasonable observation. I can fix this, Elena said firmly, but I need time, and right now my daughter needs me more. James nodded. Go. We'll continue this tomorrow. In the car, Elena's confidence wavered. She'd bought herself some time, but the truth was, she wasn't sure she could deliver on her promise. And now something was wrong with Sophia. The school's front office was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to her churning thoughts. Sophia sat outside the principal's office, arms crossed, refusing to meet her eyes. Ms. Martinez, the principal, Dr. Harris, greeted her. Please come in. Sophia, you too. Inside, Elena learned that her daughter, her usually perfect rule-following daughter, had gotten into a fight during lunch period. She punched Tommy Williams, Dr. Harris explained. Apparently, he made some comments about your family's background. Sophia, still silent, stared at her hands. What comments? Elena asked softly. He said, Sophia's voice cracked. He said we only got to come here because Mr. Bradford felt sorry for the poor mechanic's daughter, that we didn't really belong. Elena felt the words like a physical blow, echoing too closely her own doubts, her own struggles to belong in her new world. Dr. Harris cleared his throat. While we understand Sophia was provoked, violence is never the answer. We're looking at a 3-day suspension. I understand, Elena said, even as her mind raced ahead to childcare arrangements, work meetings she'd have to reschedule. In the car afterward, Sophia finally spoke. Are you mad? Elena thought carefully before answering. No, Mija. I'm sad that you felt you had to use your fists instead of your words. But mostly, I'm sorry that I've been so focused on proving myself at work that I didn't see you were struggling too. Sophia's voice wavered. I just wanted to make you proud. Oh, Sophia. Elena pulled into a parking lot so she could turn and face her daughter fully. You already make me proud every single day. And maybe it's time we both stopped trying so hard to prove we belong and just focused on being who we are. Her phone buzzed again. Wright, demanding an update on the engine modifications. Elena turned it off. Some things were more important than engines. Her father had taught her that too. The resignation letter sat unfinished on Elena's laptop, cursor blinking accusingly after the words, I regret to inform you. She'd been staring at it for an hour, sitting in her old familiar spot at Pete's auto shop. The letter seemed both too formal and too inadequate to explain everything she was feeling. Pete watched her from his workbench, pretending to organize tools while actually keeping an eye on his former employee. The shop smelled the same as always, oil, metal, and the coffee Pete claimed was good enough to strip paint. You're thinking too hard, he finally said, setting down a wrench. I can hear the gears grinding from here. Elena managed a weak smile. That's what Dad used to say. Miguel was right about a lot of things. Pete pulled up a stool beside her, including how stubborn you can be when you're scared. I'm not scared, Elena protested automatically, but they both knew better. The past week had been a blur of crisis. Management. Sophia's suspension meant juggling childcare with critical project deadlines. The prototype engine still wasn't working, despite Elena's promised breakthroughs. And this morning, she'd overheard 2 senior engineers discussing how she was dragging down the whole department with her amateur theories. I don't belong there, Pete, she said quietly. I was kidding myself thinking I could jump from fixing cars to designing engines. Funny, Pete replied. That's exactly what your father said the first time one of his papers got rejected. Elena looked up sharply. What? Oh, yeah. Miguel was ready to give up the whole thing, stick to just fixing cars. Pete smiled at the memory. You were about 4, playing with his slide rule like it was a toy. He watched you figure out how to use it, actually use it, and said maybe he was wrong about giving up. I don't remember that. You wouldn't. But I do. Pete stood, moving to a cabinet she'd never seen him open before. Been saving this for the right moment. He returned with a dusty folder, its edges worn with age. Inside were her father's original drafts of his research papers, covered in handwritten notes and corrections. Found these when we cleaned out his office, Pete explained. Look at the dates. Elena flipped through the pages, noting how many times. The papers had been revised, rewritten, rejected, and refined. He kept trying. For 10 years, even while working full-time, even when people said he was wasting his time. Pete tapped the folder. You know why? Elena shook her head. Because he believed what he was doing mattered. Not just for him, but for every mechanic who ever saw a better way to build an engine. Pete fixed her with a stern look. Sound familiar? Before Elena could respond, her phone buzzed. James's name lit up the screen, but she let it go to voicemail. Another message appeared, Wright demanding to know where she was. They're probably wondering why I'm not at work, she said. Are they? Pete nodded at her phone. Or is James checking on you because he sees what I see? Someone running away from exactly where she belongs. Eleanor stared at the resignation letter on her screen, then at her father's papers. The contrast was striking. One, an admission of defeat. The other, a testament to persistence. Sophia punched a kid for saying we don't belong, she said suddenly. What kind of example am I setting by proving him right? Pete chuckled. Now you're thinking like Miguel's daughter again. The shop door chimed, and Elena turned to see James standing there, looking oddly out of place in his expensive suit. Your assistant said I might find you here, he said simply. Elena stood, closing her laptop. James, Before you say anything, he interrupted, I need to show you something. He pulled out his tablet, pulling up a familiar document. Your father's original paper on dynamic load distribution, the one that inspired our prototype. I've read it, Elena said, multiple times. But have you read his personal notes, the ones he submitted to the patent office? James handed her the tablet. Look at the last page. Eleanor scrolled down, then froze. There, in her father's precise handwriting, was a series of calculations she'd never seen before. Calculations that directly addressed the problems they'd been having with the prototype. Where did you find this? In the patent office archives. It took some digging. James smiled slightly. Your father didn't just predict these problems, Elena. He solved them. 20 years ago. Elena looked from the tablet to her father's old papers to the unfinished resignation letter. Sometimes, she realized, running away took more energy than staying to fight. I need to get back to the lab, she said firmly. Pete's approving nod followed them out, along with the echo of her father's voice in her memory. The hardest problems are always worth solving, Mija. Always. The old newspaper clipping was yellowed. With age, carefully preserved between the pages of James's personal copy of Advanced Engine Design Theory. The headline read, Local Mechanics' Revolutionary Engine Design Challenges Industry Standards. Below it, a younger Miguel Martinez stood proudly in front of his shop, one arm around a teenage apprentice who looked remarkably like James Bradford. You knew my father, Elena said softly. It wasn't a question. They were in James's office after hours, the city lights twinkling beyond his windows. He nodded, handling the clipping with reverence. I was 17 when my car broke down outside his shop. Instead of just fixing it, he taught me why it had failed. Spent the whole summer learning from him. James smiled at the memory. That's what made me want to study engineering. Elena stared at the photo, at her father's familiar smile. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed this was about your abilities and not about repaying an old debt? James settled behind his desk. Miguel changed my life. He showed me that true innovation comes from understanding both theory and practice. That's why I knew you were exactly what this company needed. Before Elena could respond, Sophia burst into the office, still wearing her safety goggles from the after-school engineering club. Mom! Mom! I figured it out! Sophia! Elena turned, in surprise. How did you— I let her in, James admitted. She called my office directly, said it was important. Sophia was practically bouncing with excitement, clutching her grandfather's original manual. I was reading Abuelo's notes for my project, and I found something about the engine timing. Look, she spread the manual on James's desk, flipping to a page filled with Miguel's neat annotations. See these calculations. They're not about load distribution at all. They're about micro-adjustments in timing based on fuel mixture variations. Elena leaned over the manual, her eyes widening as she followed her father's notes. That's why the prototype keeps failing. We've been focusing on the wrong variable entirely. Exactly. Sophia pointed to a specific equation. Abuelo wrote that engine efficiency isn't just about power distribution. It's about perfect timing. Like a dance! James studied the notes with growing excitement. This could solve our production issues. The entire approach would need to be recalibrated, but it would work, Elena finished. She looked at her daughter with pride. How? Did you figure this out? Sophia shrugged, suddenly shy. I just read it the way you taught me to read engines, looking for the story they're trying to tell. Elena pulled her daughter close, fighting back tears. All this time, she'd been worried about failing Sophia, when really they'd been walking their path together. There's something else you should see, James said, pulling a file from his desk. The patent office finally found Miguel's complete records. He handed Elena a stack of papers. He never gave up on his research, Elena, even after he had to stop publishing. Elena paged through the documents, years of careful notes, observations, and improvements to his original theories. Her father had kept working, kept innovating, even while spending his days fixing cars to support his family. He was waiting for technology to catch up to his ideas, James explained, and now it has. We have the computational power and materials he could only dream of. And we have something else he didn't have, Sophia added. We have each other. Elena looked at her daughter, then at James, then back at her father's lifetime of work. Suddenly the path forward was clear. We need to rebuild the prototype, she said. Not just modify it, completely rebuild it with Dad's timing principles as the foundation. James nodded. Wright won't like the delay. Wright can help or get. Out of the way, Elena said firmly. This isn't just about building a better engine anymore. This is about finishing what my father started. What we all started, Sophia corrected, holding up the manual. Abuelo's theories, your experience, my observations. She grinned. We're like a really efficient engine ourselves. James laughed. She's definitely Miguel's granddaughter. He stood, decision made. I'll call an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. Elena, you'll present the new direction. Elena nodded, gathering her father's papers with careful hands. First thing tomorrow. But right now, she smiled at Sophia. Right now, I think we need ice cream to celebrate properly. Can Mr. Bradford come too? Sophia asked. He can tell us stories about Abuelo as a teacher. James looked surprised and touched by the invitation. I'd like that very much. As they left the office, Elena paused to look at the old newspaper photo one more time. Her father's smile seemed to hold a new meaning now, not just pride in past achievements, but hope for the future he'd helped set in motion. A future that was finally ready for his dreams. The Innovation Award gleamed on Elena's desk, catching the morning light for outstanding achievement in engine design innovation. But it was the smaller text below that made her throat tight every time she read it. The Miguel Martinez Memorial Prize for Excellence in Practical Engineering. 3 months had passed since Sophia's breakthrough with the timing calculations. The prototype that had once been deemed a failure was now the cornerstone of Bradford Automotive's new engine line. Even Wright had been forced to admit that the combination of Miguel's theories and Elena's practical experience had produced something revolutionary. "Another article about you in the engineering journal," Dr. Chen said, dropping a magazine on Elena's desk. "They're calling it the biggest advancement in engine efficiency in 20 years. Elena smiled at the cover photo, she and Sophia standing beside the prototype, both in matching lab coats. James had insisted on including Sophia in the press coverage, saying innovation should be celebrated regardless of age. "The board meeting went well?" Dr. Chen asked. "Better than well." Elena pulled up the latest test results on her computer. "Full approval for the production line. We start tooling next month." "And the special project?" Elena's smile widened. She led Dr. Chen to a secured lab down the hall, where a separate team was working on something even more important than the new engine line. "Pete's Auto Shop Technical Training Center," Elena said, showing her the plans. "A partnership between Bradford Automotive and local trade schools. Full scholarships for students who want to combine practical mechanics with engineering theory." "Your father would have loved this," Dr. Chen said softly. "He would have been the first instructor." Eleanor touched the blueprint where the main teaching bay would be. "We're starting with 20 students, focusing on those who might not otherwise have access to engineering education, like a certain mechanic's daughter." "Exactly." Elena checked her watch. "Speaking of which, I need to pick up Sophia. She's presenting her science fair project today. The one based on your father's research." "Actually, no." Elena gathered her things. "She's developed her own theories about electric motor optimization. Says her grandfather inspired her to think beyond what's already been done." The drive to Sophia's school felt different now. The same roads, the same buildings, but Elena no longer felt like an outsider trying to fit in. She belonged exactly where she was, bridging the world of practical mechanics and theoretical engineering, just as her father had dreamed of doing. Sophia was waiting outside the science building, practically vibrating with excitement. "Mom, my project won first place." "Of course it did," Elena said, hugging her daughter. "Want to tell me about it over dinner? James is joining us to discuss the training center plans. Can we go to Pete's first? I want to show him my trophy, already planned on it." At Pete's Auto Shop, the familiar smell of oil and metal wrapped around them like a welcome. Pete was with a customer, but his face lit up when he saw them. "There's my favorite engineers," he called out. "Hold on a minute. Got to show you something." He disappeared into his office and returned with a stack of applications. "First round of candidates for the training program, including Tommy Williams." Elena raised her eyebrows. "The boy Sophia punched. The very same. Seems your daughter did more than bruise his ego that day. Got him thinking about his own future." Sophia studied the application with surprise. "He wants to be an engineer." "Sometimes people just need to see what's possible," Pete said wisely. "Speaking of which," he pulled out an envelope. "Special delivery from the patent office." Elena opened it carefully. Inside was the official documentation. Her father's. Original engine designs, updated with their new modifications, now legally recognized under both the Martinez and Bradford names. "Frame that one," Pete advised. "It's history in the making." Later, over dinner, James raised his glass in a toast. "To Miguel Martinez, who taught me that true innovation comes from getting your hands dirty." "To Abuelo," Sophia added, "who left us a puzzle to solve together." "To family," Elena finished, looking at her daughter and the man who had helped make her father's dreams reality. "In all its forms." The Innovation Award might have her name on it, but Elena knew the real achievement wasn't in the recognition. It was in the way Sophia's eyes lit up when solving a technical problem. In the future, students who would learn as she had, through both books and practical experience. and in the legacy of a mechanic who had never stopped believing in the power of understanding how things worked. Some dreams, she had learned, just needed the right time and the right people to become reality. The engagement ring caught Elena by surprise, glinting in the soft light of James's office. It was elegant, but understated, not a flashy statement of wealth, but a thoughtful reflection of her style, just like the man holding it. "I had planned something more romantic," James admitted, "but then you started talking about the expansion plans, and I realized this is us. This is who we are. Two people who fell in love over engine designs and innovative dreams." Elena stared at the ring, her mind racing. Earlier that day, she'd been offered the position of Director of Innovation at Bradford Automotive, a role created specifically for her unique blend of practical and theoretical expertise. "Now this, James, before you answer," he interrupted, "you should know something. I've already talked to Sophia about this." Elena's head snapped up. "You have?" James smiled. "She made me prove my intentions were honorable, asked some very tough questions about work-life balance and my commitment to supporting both your careers." Despite her shock, Elena laughed. "That sounds like my daughter. She's remarkable, just like her mother." James set the ring on his desk. "I'm not just asking you to marry me, Elena. I'm asking to be part of your family, to help support Sophia's dreams as much as yours." Before Elena could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. Wright entered looking uncharacteristically excited. "The test results are in," he announced, then stopped short at the scene before him. "Oh, I'm interrupting." "No," Elena said quickly, professional instincts taking over. "What results?" Wright handed her a tablet. "The new production line. The efficiency ratings are even better than we projected. The board wants to fast-track global implementation." Elena scanned the data, her excitement growing. "These numbers, they're revolutionary. We need to—" She caught herself, looking guiltily at James, and the ring still sitting on his desk. He was watching her with amusement and understanding. "Go," he said softly. "The other question can wait. This is what Miguel would have wanted to see first." Elena impulsively kissed his cheek before hurrying after Wright, her mind already racing with implementation plans. Behind her she heard James chuckle. The production floor was buzzing with energy. Engineers clustered around testing stations, comparing notes and projections. Elena moved among them, fielding questions and sharing their excitement. "Ms. Martinez!" Tommy Williams called. Out. The former school bully was now one of their most promising training center students, his natural mechanical aptitude finally finding positive expression. "Look at the thermal efficiency curve on the new model." Elena studied the readout, pride swelling in her chest. Not just at the impressive results, but at the way Tommy and other students were growing into their potential. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sophia. "Did he ask?" "Dad showed me the ring last week, but made me promise not to tell." Elena's heart skipped at Sophia's casual use of Dad to refer to James. It had started happening gradually over the past few months, as natural as the way they all worked together on engineering problems. Another message followed. "BTW, my college application. Essay about Abuelo's engine theories, got an early response from MIT. Call me." Joy and anxiety mixed in Elena's chest. MIT had been Sophia's dream school since she'd learned about their engineering program. And now, Elena. James's voice made her turn. He'd followed her to the production floor, still carrying the ring box. "I know the timing isn't perfect, but when is it ever? We're engineers. We know life is about making adjustments, finding the right balance." Around them, the factory hummed with the sound of innovation coming to life. Elena looked at the ring, then at the test results, then at her messages from Sophia, all the pieces of her life fitting together in ways she'd never imagined possible. "Yes," she said simply. James blinked. "Yes, to all of it, to being Director of Innovation, to marriage, to building this future together. She held out her hand. We're engineers, right? We know how to make things work. As James slipped the ring onto her finger, applause broke out across the production floor. Elena realized their moment had had an audience. Wright, Dr. Chen, Tommy, all the engineers and students who had become part of their extended family. Her phone buzzed again, Sophia sending a string of excited emojis. Somehow news had already reached her daughter. I had help planning this, James admitted, gesturing at their celebrating colleagues. A lot of help. Elena looked at the ring on her finger, then at the production line running her father's revolutionary engine design, and finally at the man who had helped make it all possible. My father always said the best engines run on perfect timing, she said softly. I guess he was right about that too. The house keys felt heavy in Elena's hand as she stood on the porch of the craftsman-style home. It wasn't the largest house in the neighborhood, but with its wraparound porch and converted garage workshop, it was perfect. More importantly, it was exactly halfway between Bradford Automotive and Sophia's school. The previous owner was an architect, James said, coming up behind her. That's why the garage has all the extra wiring and ventilation. Perfect for a home engineering lab. Did you plan that too? Elena asked, knowing the answer. James's attention to detail was one of the things she loved about him. Sophia bounded past them, already clutching her box of tools, a mix of her grandfather's old ones and new ones James had given her for her birthday. Can I set up my workstation? First, I have ideas for the layout. Homework first, Elena called after her, but Sophia was already disappearing into the garage, her excited voice echoing back through plans for tool organization and project spaces. Inside, Elena found herself in the kitchen, running her hands over smooth countertops. The room opened onto a dining area where she could already imagine family dinners, homework sessions, and late-night engineering discussions. Having second thoughts? James asked softly, noticing her contemplative mood. No, Elena said honestly. Just remembering. Our old apartment above Rosie's diner seemed so small, but somehow we made it work. Sophia did her homework on the kitchen counter, while I studied repair manuals, and now she has a whole workshop to explore. James wrapped his arms around her from behind. You gave her that foundation, Elena. The rest is just extra space to grow. From the garage came the sound of Sophia's voice, apparently video calling. Her friends. And there's a whole wall for project planning. Dad's letting me set up a 3D printer, and Mom's bringing her diagnostic equipment. Elena smiled at Sophia's easy use of Mom and Dad, a transition that had happened so naturally it felt like it had always been this way. I got the MIT acceptance package today, James mentioned casually. Elena turned to face him. And? Full scholarship, plus a stipend for the engineering summer program. His eyes twinkled. Someone was very impressed by her essay on practical applications of theoretical engine design. Sophia will be thrilled, Elena paused. And terrified. Boston is so far. About that? James led her to what would be their home office, pointing to a folder on the desk. Bradford Automotive is opening an East Coast research facility. They need someone to oversee the implementation of the new engine line and run the training program expansion. Elena picked up the folder, understanding dawning. You're offering me the position, only if you want it. You'd have full autonomy, and we could split our time between here and Boston while Sophia's in school. He hesitated. I know it's a big change. Everything's been a big change, Elena pointed out. But look how well that's worked out. The sound of a car pulling up outside interrupted them. Through the window, Elena saw Pete's familiar truck, followed by Dr. Chen's car. More vehicles were arriving. Wright, Tommy, other colleagues and students from the training center. I hope you don't mind, James said. I thought we could use some help moving in, and maybe celebrate a little. Elena stepped onto the porch to greet their guests, watching as Pete immediately headed to the garage to see Sophia's workshop plans. Dr. Chen carried a potted plant, while Tommy and other students unloaded boxes with the energy only teenagers possess. "Your father would have loved this," Pete said later, as they all sat around boxes of pizza in the half-furnished living room. "He always said a home needs three things: good bones, good tools, and good people to fill it with." Sophia, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her engineering textbooks spread around her, looked up. "Tell us more about Abuelo, about when he was teaching." As Pete launched into stories about Miguel's early days, Elena leaned back against James, surrounded by the family they had built, not just the three of them, but this entire community of people brought together by a shared love of innovation and learning. The house keys no longer felt heavy in her pocket. They felt like the beginning of a new chapter, one her father had helped write through the legacy he'd left behind. A legacy that would continue through Sophia, through the training center, and through every engine that carried a piece of Miguel Martinez's revolutionary dreams. The company merger documents covered Elena's desk, their legal language spelling out a future she hadn't anticipated. Global Motors, one of the largest automotive manufacturers in the world, wanted to acquire Bradford Automotive, specifically for the revolutionary engine design that Elena and her team had developed. "It's a generous offer," Wright said, standing beside James in Elena's office. The kind that comes once in a lifetime. Elena studied the proposed terms. The numbers were staggering, enough to secure Bradford Automotive's future for generations, but something about it made her uneasy. "They want to restrict access to the technology," she said, pointing to a clause buried in the legal text. "Limited. Licensing, controlled distribution, standard practice," Wright argued. "They're protecting their investment. They're limiting who can benefit from it," Elena countered. "What about the training centers, the outreach programs?" James had been unusually quiet during the discussion. Now he spoke up. "It's your decision, Elena. As Director of Innovation and the co-patent holder, you have to sign off on this." Elena stood, moving to the window that overlooked the production floor. Below, she could see Tommy leading a group of new trainees through an engine assembly demonstration. Many of them were from backgrounds like hers. Practical experience but limited opportunities for formal education. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "MIT orientation schedule just came out. Also made some tweaks to your training center and curriculum. Can we review it over dinner?" The contrast struck Elena hard. Here was Sophia, about to attend one of the world's most prestigious engineering schools, while so many other talented young people might never get that chance. "What would you do?" she asked James. He joined her at the window. "Honestly, I'm torn. The merger would secure our financial future, expand our reach globally." He paused. "But I keep thinking about what Miguel taught me that summer, about how knowledge should be shared, not hoarded." "Your father was an idealist," Wright said, not unkindly, "but this is business." Elena turned back to her desk, picking up her father's old manual. She'd had it restored and bound properly, though the pages still bore his handwritten notes. Opening it randomly, she read, "The true value of innovation lies not in who owns it, but in how many lives it changes." "I have a counter-proposal," she said suddenly. Wright raised his eyebrows. "Counter to $1 billion offer. We don't sell to Global Motors." Elena's mind was racing ahead, seeing the possibilities. "Instead, we open-source part of the technology." "What?" Wright looked stunned. "Not all of it," Elena clarified. "We maintain the patents on the core innovations, but we release the basics, principles, the foundational research. We create a framework for other companies to build on, improve, adapt." "That's—" Wright struggled for words. "That's either brilliant or insane." James was smiling now. "It's both. Just like Miguel's original theories." He turned to Elena. "You're talking about creating an industry standard." "Exactly. Instead of one company controlling the technology, we become the center of a new engineering ecosystem." Elena's excitement grew as she explained. Other companies would have to license our patents for commercial use, but students, researchers, small shops, they could access and learn from the basic principles. Like Pete's shop, James mused. Like where you started. Global Motors won't like it, Wright warned. No, Eleanor agreed, but they'll have to adapt, because if we do this right, we won't just be selling engines. We'll be changing how the entire industry thinks about innovation and education. She pulled up the training center data on her computer. Look at these results. Every student who's come through our program has either gone on to further education or found better employment. Now imagine that happening globally. James studied the numbers, then looked at the merger documents. It would mean slower growth, less immediate profit, but sustainable growth, Elena finished. And a legacy that would make my father proud. Wright was silent for a long moment, then sighed. I'll have legal draft new proposals, but you're the one who has to present this to the board. I know. Elena gathered her father's manual and her laptop. And I will, right after I have dinner, with my daughter and review her ideas for the training curriculum. After Wright left, James perched on the edge of her desk. You know this path will be harder. The best ones usually are. Elena smiled. Besides, when have we ever taken the easy route? True. He picked up the merger documents. Want me to tell Global Motors, or should I? Let's do it together. Elena checked her watch. But first, family dinner. Sophia's been texting about some new ideas for the training program. And I have a feeling they'll fit perfectly with what we're planning. As they left the office, Elena paused to look at the production floor again. Her father had taught her that every engine tells a story. Now she was making sure that story would be heard by anyone willing to learn. The deed to Pete's auto shop lay signed on Elena's desk, next to the framed photo from her first day as a mechanic. Pete's signature was a bit shaky, arthritis-making. Writing harder these days, but his smile when he'd handed it over had been as bright as ever. Always knew you'd be the one to take it over, he'd said, though I didn't expect it quite like this. Elena touched the deed gently. The shop would become the flagship location for their new training program, combining practical mechanics with advanced engineering education. Already, construction crews were preparing to expand the workspace while carefully preserving the original building's character. The first class starts next month, Elena told James as he entered her office. 20 students, full scholarships. Pete's going to teach the fundamentals course. And Sophia? Elena smiled. She's designed half the curriculum already. Says she wants to start a mentorship program when she's home from MIT for breaks. James settled into the chair across from her desk, the same chair where, months ago, he'd first revealed his connection to her father. The board approved the final budget for the open source initiative. Even Wright? Especially Wright, after your presentation last week about the global impact potential. James shook his head admiringly. I think you actually convinced him that doing good can be good business. Elena pulled up the latest data on her computer. Since announcing their plan to open source the basic technology while maintaining patents on advanced applications, interest had exploded. Universities, research facilities, and small shops around the world were already building on their work. Look at this, she said, turning the screen. A mechanic in Kenya adapted our design for local conditions. And here, a high school team in Brazil used our principles to win their national engineering competition. Miguel would have loved this, James said softly. He knew. Eleanor opened her father's manual to a page she'd only recently discovered. Look what he wrote here, dated just a month before he got sick. The handwriting was weaker than his usual precise script, but the words were clear. Knowledge grows by sharing. Every engine is a teacher, every mechanic a student. Elena will understand this someday. A knock at the door interrupted them. Tommy stood there looking professional in his new instructor's uniform. The new equipment for Pete's shop just arrived. And there's something you should see. They followed him to the loading dock, where a familiar face waited. The young couple whose Mercedes had broken down all those months ago, starting everything. "We heard about the training program," the woman said. "Our foundation wants to help fund expansions to other cities." Elena exchanged glances with James. More opportunities, more lives they could change. The decision she'd made to prioritize access over profit was already creating ripples she hadn't imagined. Later that evening, Elena visited Pete's shop one last time before the renovations began. The familiar smells of oil and metal brought back a flood of memories. Her father teaching her to read engines, Pete giving her a chance when she needed it most, Sophia doing homework among the tools. Her phone buzzed. Sophia sending photos of her MIT dorm room. She'd decorated one wall with engine diagrams and a huge photo of her grandfather's shop. "Bringing a piece of home with me," the message read. "Can't wait to share everything I learn with the new students." "You did good, Papi," Elena whispered to the quiet shop. "Better than you ever knew." She walked through the space, touching tools she'd used thousands of times. Each one held a story, a lesson, a piece of the legacy she was now expanding. The hydraulic lift, where she'd first discovered her talent for diagnosis. The workbench, where Sophia had first shown her own mechanical aptitude. The office where James had revealed the truth about knowing her father. Tomorrow, construction would begin to transform this space into something new. A place where theory and practice would merge, where students from all backgrounds could learn the way she had, hands-on, supported, with access to both practical skills and advanced knowledge. Pete's auto shop would become the Martinez Bradford Technical Institute. But more importantly, it would remain what it had always been, a place where dreams could take shape, where knowledge was shared freely, and where anyone with the passion to learn would find an open door. Elena locked up for the last time. But she wasn't sad. Every ending was just another beginning. Her father had taught her that. And this beginning promised to be the best one yet. The family portrait hung in the entrance of the Martinez Bradford Technical Institute, alongside Miguel's original framed patent documents. The photo showed Eleanor, James, and Sophia at the Institute's opening ceremony, all three in matching lab coats, their smiles bright with shared purpose. Below it, a simple plaque read, "Every engine tells a story. Every person has potential." 1 year had passed since Pete's auto shop had transformed into something greater while somehow remaining true to its roots. The hydraulic lifts and tool benches now shared space with state-of-the-art diagnostic equipment and 3D printers. But the heart of the place, the belief that everyone deserved a chance to learn, remained unchanged. Elena stood in her old office, now converted into a conference room, watching the morning's activities through the window. Pete was demonstrating basic engine diagnostics to a new group of students, his arthritis forgotten as he gestured enthusiastically. Among them was Tommy Williams, now a full-time instructor himself, adding his own insights about combining practical experience with theoretical knowledge. "Ready for the board meeting?" James asked, joining her at the window. "Almost." Eleanor checked her tablet, reviewing the year's statistics. Enrollment had tripled, with satellite locations opening in 3 other cities. Their open-source engine design had sparked innovations across the globe, while Bradford Automotive's advanced patents ensured they remained industry leaders. "Sophia's presentation is ready to stream from MIT," James added. Their daughter had insisted on participating in today's anniversary celebration, even if only virtually. Her freshman year studies hadn't diminished her commitment to the Institute's mission. The conference room slowly filled with familiar faces. Wright, now an enthusiastic supporter of their educational initiative. Dr. Chen, heading up their research division. Representatives from other companies and schools interested in their model. Sophia's face appeared on the large screen, her MIT dorm room visible behind her. "Hi, Mum. Dad." You won't believe what we've been developing here using Abuelo's principles. As the meeting progressed, Elena found herself thinking about that rainy morning when a broken-down Mercedes had changed everything. How many other lives might change because she'd taken a chance that day? How many other dreams might find their way to reality? Her father's manual sat open on the conference table, no longer just a family heirloom, but required reading for every student who came through their doors. Miguel's vision of combining practical skills with theoretical knowledge had become a blueprint for transformation, not just in engineering, but in lives. After the meeting, Elena walked through the training area. Students looked up from their work to wave, some calling out questions or proudly showing off their projects. She knew each of their stories: the single mother learning engineering while working full-time, the veteran transitioning to civilian life, the high school student who reminded her so much of herself at that age. Ms. Martinez, a young woman, hurried up, clutching a diagnostic tablet. "I think I found something in the engine data patterns like your father described in Chapter 3. Elena smiled, remembering her own excitement at similar discoveries. "Show me," she said, pulling up a stool beside the student's workstation. Later that evening, after the celebrations had ended and the facility grew quiet, Elena sat in the old, familiar corner of what had once been Pete's shop. James found her there, lost in thought. "Good day?" he asked softly. "Perfect day." Elena looked around at what they'd built together. Not just a school or a business, but a bridge between worlds. "I just wish Dad could see this." "He can," James said simply. "Through every student who learns here, through every innovation that builds on his work, through Sophia carrying his legacy forward in her own way." Eleanor touched the worn cover of her father's manual, thinking of all the hands that would open it, all the minds that would build upon its wisdom. "He always said every engine tells a story," she mused. "I don't think he knew how many chapters his story would have." James took her hand, wedding ring glinting in the evening light. "The best stories never really end. They just inspire new ones to begin." Through the window, the sun was setting on another day of possibilities, of dreams taking shape, of lives changing one lesson at a time. Elena squeezed James's hand, knowing with certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be, at the intersection of past and future, of theory and practice, of one generation's dreams becoming another's reality.